The United Federation of Teachers has been working overtime to keep America's schools shuttered. Not only have they publicly opposed reopening, but now we've learned that they've been manipulating the CDC guidance behind the scenes. A recent report by the New York Post reads, the American Federation of Teachers lobbied the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention on and even suggested language for the federal agency's school reopening guidance released in February. The powerful teachers union's full court press preceded the federal agency putting the brakes on a full reopening of in-person classrooms, according to emails between top CDC, AFT, and White House officials. The report continues. The lobbying paid off. In at least 2 instances, language suggestions offered by the union were adopted nearly verbatim into the final text of the CDC document. Follow the science, they said. Did they do that? Well, to teach you a lesson, of course, they pretended to. They are teachers, after all. In a recent tweet, Randy Weingarten, the president of the American Federation of Teachers, wrote, I think many people who saw teachers as glorified babysitters got a reality check this year when schooling had to be done at home. Teachers deserve respect and recognition for all the ways they help communities. So not only do they want to keep your kids' schools shut down, they want you to thank them for it. Joining us now is Jonathan Butcher. He's the Will Skillman Fellow in Education at the Heritage Foundation. Jonathan, good to have you.
Great to be with you.
Any surprise, anything you want to add to this notion that the CDC was in a PR back and forth for the proper way to describe why the schools should not be open, which, in my opinion, they should have been all along?
Well, I think it's important to note that about 1/3 of schools around the U.S. are still not back to full in-person instruction, and this includes large cities. Districts like Los Angeles are still going to part-time, as well as in Seattle, where even if students are there for in-person learning, it's part-time for the day, right? It's not a full day worth of school. So we need to understand that this is now another full school year, plus half of the last school year or a part of the last semester, where students have not been back for in-person instruction.
What do we know about the demands of teachers' unions for the areas that are not in in-person instruction fully yet? Are there still rumblings, at least, that the expectation will be children have to be vaccinated as well as educators? Because that was talked about and then they quieted down, but we have a whole other school year starting in September.
Well, I think it's important to remember that what happened after the spring last year, when teacher unions realized that schools would not be opening to in-person instruction right away in the fall in many of these large cities, was that they started to advocate for ideas and policy goals that had nothing to do with schools. Things like forgiving rents and mortgages and getting police out of schools, if not out of communities entirely. So unions have capitalized on this opportunity to be in the spotlight to advocate for their other policy goals.
What is it that the unions really want here? Why is it just that they want their members to have the option to Zoom in from the couch for all eternity, or what?
Well, I think it's clear from what has been so far a pretty cozy relationship with the Biden administration that the unions are excited to see taxpayers spend a considerable amount, perhaps even an untold amount of new spending on public schools. This could possibly mean the hiring of additional employees, which would then mean more union members in the future. I mean, the amount of money that Biden is talking about in his recent proposals from infrastructure and beyond this is money that has not been considered for public schools perhaps ever. And given the research we have on the relationship between student achievement and spending, we know that this will increase their bureaucracy that's in schools and not go to what student needs in the classroom.
Can you give us a sense of what kind of political sway does the teachers union really represent for the Democrats, just in terms of donations, of membership? I mean, I think if people had a better and more readily available understanding of the political muscle behind teachers unions, which are entirely behind the Democrat Party, this is not a bipartisan thing, they might feel very differently about the way some of these negotiations go on. Can you give us a sense of it?
Well, all you have to do is look at what has happened in some of the metro areas in the past 6 months that have been trying to figure out how to get kids back in class. So take Chicago, right? The union successfully told their members not to come back, even after the district and the mayor said that teachers should be back for in-person instruction. Union said no. There was a standoff, and reopening was delayed. And the reopening, especially for high school students, was delayed even longer than it was for elementary and middle school. All of this replayed itself in Philadelphia just a few weeks later. So even when district officials and local leaders are saying to teachers, we are ready to open for in-person instruction, if the union says no, the districts so far have backed down, right? And they've given in. So that means that the needs of the unions are being put ahead of the needs of students and teachers.
We have here the Biden Education Secretary Miguel Cardona defending the teachers' union's slowness to want to return to in-person instruction. Here's what he said.
So if we can't blame President Biden for the fact that many schools are still closed, do we blame teachers' unions?
No, I think that another quick out. Reopening schools in the middle of a pandemic is not as easy as some may think. You know, I remember serving as Commissioner of Education in Connecticut when we were making decisions. And, you know, there's some schools that are very over 100, 120 years old with old ventilation systems. And we have to make sure that those schools are operational and that they're safe and that there's good communication around those strategies that are needed in order to safely reopen schools.
I mean, it just honestly just sounds like a bunch of blather, and the whole point is, oh, well, no one's really to blame for this, even though the science, so to speak, has indicated it's perfectly safe to reopen schools. There are places in the country that have had in-school or in-person teaching in schools for the entire school year in 2020, 2021. Private and parochial schools in particular have been doing that. They have not been scenes of death and despair from COVID, quite the contrary. So are people, Jonathan, meaning parents, finally seeing this for what it is? Is there a backlash against the teachers' unions?
Well, look, to start with, you're right. Some 60% of private schools around the country have been open to in-person instruction for this school year. And look, if we're talking about April, even March, we're not talking about the middle of the pandemic, right? I mean, we have vaccines, which we hope are bringing for most of the country closer to the end of a pandemic rather than saying we're at the beginning or the middle. Remember, last year, the Trump administration also delivered money in significant sums to the tune of $13 billion last March, another $50+ billion in December. So the money has been there for schools to use for months now, and just a small fraction of it has been spent. To your latter point, are parents realizing what's going on? I think they are, and state lawmakers are too. I mean, look at what's happened in West Virginia, Kentucky, which were union strongholds for many years, have passed private school choice options for families just this year. You even have lawmakers in places like Rhode Island talking about lifting a ban on charter school growth in that state. And that's just a sample of what's happening with public and private school choice around the country. That's the story coming out of the pandemic, is that families have realized that districts have let them down, and now parents can take these matters and should be into their own hands, and state lawmakers should be giving them the opportunity to make decisions and choices over how and where their children learn.
Jonathan, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching the Heritage Foundation's YouTube channel. With more than 500,000 members, we are the nation's largest conservative research and education institution. We believe the principles and ideas of the American founding are worth conserving and renewing. Please help us further our mission by subscribing to this channel and sharing our videos with your family and friends.